Now, that was just one example of many where reporters have been detained by the police at events that they were covering in a professional capacity, at events where they were practicing their First Amendment rights, which leads many of us to ask if the police in this country have become overzealous, if the protections granted under the Constitution are increasingly coming under assault, especially for those in the media that are just trying to do their jobs. Here to discuss it with me is media consultant Joel Silberman. Joel, thanks so much for being here. A long time since we have you on the show.
Nice to be back.
Now, tell me this. Do you feel like, as of late, we've seen a bit of a pattern emerging, that we see more and more, of these events where it turns out that journalists also get swept up and get arrested at protests or, whatever it might be that they're covering?
Yes, I absolutely have seen a pattern. And when I think about Amy Goodman, who was in 2008, that was when I was really aware that we'd crossed a border somehow, that somehow the First Amendment, freedom of the press, it's before the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, which everybody's up in arms, if you'll pardon the pun, about. Then I knew we'd crossed a border. And you and I have talked before about this wall that has eroded between management and editorial, where reporters used to be the flagship of a news organization, and management really was using that energy to create what America needed, which was the news. Thomas Jefferson said that given the choice between government with no newspapers or newspapers with no government, he would take the latter.
I think there's a lot of people out there, especially these days. You could see a lot of people out there that would say that. But, I mean, tell me this, too. Do you think that it has something to do with the types of events that they cover? That let's say if this is a protest where protesters are also being arrested, where the media happens to be covering, or getting this on tape, that the police perhaps using excessive force, then they're more apt to go after them to try to arrest them.
I think there's definitely control of information that has gotten worse because everyone knows that you can have the news story out very quickly. That with the internet, it's gone. It's gone the minute you've sent it and pushed your send button from your phone. So there's no question that they're trying to control information in a new way, and that sensitive things don't want to be discussed. This was a sensitive protest, and wow, no surprise. But no surprise also when you connect the dots of the long arm of corporate military-industrial complex into ownership of newspapers. It's very scary to me when this corporate wall is becoming all one, and when newspapers are fighting for their lives, when news organizations are fighting for their lives inside corporate empires. But entertainment, of course, is doing very well, and news that becomes entertainment is doing very well.
Yeah, of course, but I mean, I guess you could say that that's why we don't see perhaps some of the, mainstream media organizations at these events, right, that are rather sensitive. They're not covering protests at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Well, why would that be? It seemed to me that one of the things that interested me about this story specifically was just that. Where were the other media? Where was CNN when I really wanted to see them, or MSNBC, or NBC, CBS, or ABC, or even Fox? Where were they, and why weren't they covering this? Because it's an annual event? Excuse me, it's an annual event that has 3,000 people? It's about something controversial, and I don't think this is about politics. I think this is about freedom of assembly and covering freedom of assembly, and I think we're managing information. And when people don't want information to get out and they have powerful money at stake, defense contractors, they can reach deep, covertly, to stop it from happening. And that's what I feel. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just see this pattern.
Well, here we get into something, too. We often will juxtapose what's happening in Europe, where we see millions of people out on the streets. And you always wonder, why don't see these mass protests in America? And I think that a part of it, everyone always blames apathy, but a part of it might be that they're happening. You just don't necessarily see them on the news. And the other thing, and I completely stand by this, is that I think that people are intimidated. I've seen it happen at my own university, where someone is trying to do, a peaceful act, and before you know it, a SWAT team shows up.
I think that we are living in a tougher time, and under the guise and the fear that has been put into us. Look at the security story that we're all covering right now, and we're talking about all of this and the TSA and all of that. We're all talking about security, but we're talking about it from fear-based. And speaking as someone who's been to Israel, I've seen some of the best security in the world, and I don't feel that fear when I'm there, because I think they're more intelligent about it, if you'll excuse that pun, but I think they think about it more strategically. I think we think about manipulating a population, and that's concerning me. I've seen what you talk about at your university. I've talked to university folks about whether that exists. I also see big things happening in America that aren't getting covered. And that bothers me.
And so when this fear comes into play, I mean, what does that mean for us? You know, what do events like this, where now journalists, people that are exercising their freedom of the press, are becoming arrested, you know, what does that mean for all of those rights that are granted to us under the Constitution?
Well, it means a lot. First of all, when journalists feel like they are fearing whether or not they'll have a job, they're told, well, maybe you shouldn't cover that. And they take that fear a lot more seriously when their job is at stake. Their job never used to be at stake that way. If they got a good story, that's what kept their job. Now, covering the right kind of news that's going to make the right kind of story is how they keep their job. And I think that's affecting all of us. I think we are weakened as a nation. This is not political. This is about the Constitution.
It is about the Constitution, and I mean, personally, I can't even believe that we need to get permits for the right to assemble, since that's a right that's also granted to us in the Constitution. And, you know, more often than not, those permits are denied by the police. And so this is what happens, you know, is that when there is some unlawful assembly, as they like to call it, they just start rounding everyone up, journalists included. Joel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.